I knew I was disposable the moment Scott leaned back in his ergonomic throne, swirled his cold brew like it was a goddamn snifter of brandy, and said, "Joyce, you're the glue that keeps us from falling apart. That's not a compliment, that's a warning label. Glue doesn't get bonuses. Glue doesn't get promoted. Glue gets stepped on when the parade starts." It was 9:43 p.m. Everyone else was long gone. My heels were under my desk. My hair was in a claw clip, and my screen had that hazy glow that makes your eyeballs feel like fried onions. The warehouse in Tacoma had botched an outbound again. 3 pallets of military-grade ball bearings were routed to Florida. Nobody in Florida needs ball bearings unless they're building a cannonball roller coaster for retirees. And yet, here I was, triple confirming the bill of lading, rewriting the dock schedule, emailing the night shift floor manager a PDF tutorial I made last year, because Scott still hadn't funded the training portal. He'd called it unnecessary overhead. The same Scott who would, in precisely 6 hours, strut into the Monday ops briefing like a golden retriever who just solved quantum physics. He'd slap the conference table, point at the PowerPoint I built, and say something like, "We really pulled together on Tacoma. Big win for the team. Let's keep that energy." And no one would question it, because no one ever does. Not the CEO, not the board, and sure as hell not HR. They just smile and nod while Scott's ego bloats like a microwave burrito. It's funny how quiet the office gets at night. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own exhaustion humming in your bones. I used to think this meant I was dedicated, loyal, essential. Turns out it just meant I was alone. I'd become the human patch kit, sealing leaks, soothing tempers, fixing typos in executive emails that could have triggered federal audits. All while Scott took bows for keeping the ship afloat. Hell, I even corrected his grammar in a speech once where he pronounced logistical redundancy like it was a new TikTok trend. Still got applause. Still got invited to golf. I didn't. Before we go any deeper, I've got to ask. If you're into stories where the overlooked woman quietly reconfigures the entire game board under everyone's nose, do me a solid. Hit that follow button and throw a like on this. It actually keeps this channel going, and trust me, the team reads everyone. You're fueling some seriously petty, strategic office revenge right here. Now, back to that night. The lights above the accounting row flickered like they always do past 9, buzzing like mosquitoes trapped in a mason jar. I pulled up the upcoming project workflows, redlined 3 more items Scott would pretend he wrote, and skimmed the merger memo again. Nothing huge, just another whisper of a possible acquisition. Nothing concrete, except there was something odd, something buried in a footnote under transitionary logistics leadership. I saved it, highlighted it, emailed it to myself under the subject line, "Read this when they screw you," because they always do. Tuesday morning, Scott brought in donuts, the good kind, glazed twists, Bavarian cream. He said something about celebrating our Tacoma victory like it was D-Day. I smiled, took a jelly, and watched him thank Greg in purchasing for flagging the mistake. Greg hadn't even opened the system file, but Greg was a frat buddy. Greg had stories. Greg once hit on me at the holiday party and then forgot my name. "Joyce," Scott said. "Fake casual, you're so detail-oriented. Love that support energy." Support, not strategic, not leadership, not forward-facing. Just support, I laughed, just a breath through my nose. Then I took the jelly donut, walked back to my desk, and wrote one line in my notebook: "Build the parachute before they push you," because I could feel it coming. The freeze-out, the slow erosion. The meetings I used to lead were being streamlined. My weekly logistics roundup was now being consolidated into a broader dashboard, which Scott managed badly. I wasn't being demoted. That would require paperwork. I was just being shaved off. But what they didn't know, what Scott never noticed, was that I never stopped reading those merger drafts. I was the one who uploaded the files to the compliance portal. I was the one who fielded the acquirer's boring, redundant, just procedural calls about operational workflows. I was the one who filled in that one little clause about regulatory continuity, and I knew damn well who approved it. It happened on a Thursday, which feels cruel in hindsight. Thursdays are the slow death of the work week, too far from the weekend to hope, too close to pretend. We were wrapping up the ops round table, 15 of us stuffed into the 6th-floor conference room with stale coffee, flickering LEDs, and a projector that blinked like it was winking at my suffering. I had timed it, waited until the usual nonsense passed, supply chain updates, vague mutterings about vendor realignment, Greg trying to use the word synergy like it wasn't a war crime. Then I did what I'd rehearsed in my head while folding laundry at 2 a.m. the night before. Calm, respectful, professional. So, I said, carefully, like I was balancing a glass of water on my head, I wanted to follow up on my application for the Director of Ops transition role. I understand the board's reviewing candidates. Scott cut me off with a laugh, not a chuckle. A full-on, nasal, head-thrown-back cackle like I'd just asked if I could take over NASA. "Still dreaming of a promotion, Joyce?" he said, eyes glinting. "Maybe next decade, huh?" The room went still. Not quiet still. That specific corporate hush where no one knows if they're allowed to laugh. So they just blink into their coffee cups and pretend to check their phones. You know the one. Right, I said, just that, not a single word more. I smiled with my teeth but not my eyes, picked up my notepad, scribbled a doodle I would later realize was a guillotine. He kept going, of course. Scott always did. Nothing personal, he said, which is what people say right before it gets personal. It's just you're kind of the heart of this place, Joyce. You hold it all together. Can't have the glue trying to be the engine. I nodded like I agreed, like I was grateful for the analogy. Meanwhile, I imagined slathering that glue across his ergonomic chair and watching him rip a lumbar disc trying to escape it. The meeting ended 5 minutes early. No one looked at me. No one had to. I wasn't the woman they thought would lead. I was the one who sent polite follow-ups and carried the printer toner from the supply closet because Joyce doesn't mind, right? I walked out into the hallway, each footstep echoing off the ugly gray carpet like gunfire. Stopped by HR, Lisa, who wore fake empathy like it was a knockoff scarf from TJ Maxx. Hey Joyce, she said, glancing at her screen like she was trying to find the page number of her soul. Just wanted to let you know the director transition role, it's been filled. Scott stepping in, interim basis, of course, I said. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I felt nothing but a deep, serene clarity, like the eye of a storm. Leadership just felt, well, continuity-wise, he's already looped in on the merger, and she kept talking. I stopped listening. Because what she didn't know, what Scott didn't know, was that continuity was the very noose I'd been quietly tying for 6 months. I went back to my desk, sat down, pulled up the master copy of the legal archive from the acquirer's team, buried in version 14.6.3. Page 87, subsection C, was the clause I had snuck in during one of those late-night revisions, when legal didn't want to admit they were copying from a 2-year-old template. All post-merger operations must be transitioned through a pre-cleared and board-approved director of operational continuity for the duration of the 90-day handoff period. Guess who filled out the clearance paperwork? Guess who the board quietly approved, thinking it was just a technicality? I clicked open the Exhibit K appendix. My name, right there in 11-point calibri. Joyce L., Brenner Director, Operational Continuity, pre-cleared, stamped. Initialed, archived. Scott thought this was about a title, about ego. He didn't realize I'd stopped aiming for recognition 6 months ago. I was aiming for permanence. He was still playing checkers with the boys. I was playing Minesweeper on a nuclear grid. Let them laugh. I already had the signature line. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even break stride. I walked straight past the glass terrarium they call HR, past Greg bragging about his fantasy football league like that was a transferable skill, and straight into the parking garage where the cell signal dies and the real thinking begins. I sat in my Corolla, 12 years old, smells like spilled coffee and peppermint Altoids, and called Diane Langford, my old mentor, former director of compliance and the only person who ever saw me as more than a walking checklist. Retired now, living somewhere quiet where the Wi-Fi sucks but her garden blooms like a Disney time-lapse. She picked up on the second ring. If this is about how to kill a man with a spreadsheet, the answer is cell locking and plausible deniability. Scott laughed in my face, I said, told the whole room I should stop dreaming of a promotion. HR said he's been appointed director, interim of course, like a throat punch with a smile. There was a pause, just whined and birdsong on her end. Then, don't yell architect, build something, quietly. No one watches the woman who nods in meetings and brings her own pen. You don't need a sword, Joyce, you need a contract. It hit me like a second wind. A contract. Back when the merger was still rumor mill fodder, and the due diligence teams were crawling all over us like ants on a jelly sandwich, I'd been asked to sit in on some late-stage logistics calls. Not to contribute, God forbid, but to document. Legal wanted a body in the room who could spell bill of lading. There had been a clause, a weird one, something the acquirer's internal compliance team insisted on. I hadn't thought about it in weeks, but now it lit up in my brain like an Amber Alert. I drove home like a woman possessed, threw frozen enchiladas in the microwave and opened my work laptop before the cheese had even melted. I tunneled into the document archive, past 4 levels of SharePoint folders that hadn't been cleaned since Obama was in office. There it was. Folder, Merger Due Diligence Final V3 JLB edited. I clicked, scrolled, prayed, page 87. Exhibit L, named Operational Continuity Officer, NOCO. In the event of a merger, the acquirer requires a board-approved, pre-cleared individual responsible for regulatory operations continuity and post-signature execution. This individual shall have sole authority to validate transition completion for all ops-facing functions. I stared at the screen. My name was in the margin. Not in the main text, too risky, but in the metadata. Track changes. A lonely little comment bubble from Darren in legal. Timestamp 2:13 a.m. 6 months ago. Joyce B. To confirm details. I'd forgotten. I'd been in the trenches back then, cleaning up a warehouse fire drill, dealing with backorders, 3 vendor audits in 1 week. Darren had asked if I could fill in the details for the NOCO designation just in case it came up again. Said the acquirer was weird about continuity. I wrote it up, routed it through a compliance thread, and filed it under Someday This Will Bite Someone. Someday had arrived, and the someone was Scott. I re-downloaded the clause, highlighted it in 4 shades of cautionary hell, pulled up the board clearance emails, checked the timestamps, then sat back and smiled like a woman who'd just found a loaded gun under her floorboards. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to architect. Next morning, I walked into work wearing the same black slacks I wore when my dog died, my grief pants basically, because I was in mourning. For the man Scott thought he was. He passed me in the hall and winked. Rough day yesterday, huh? He said. Look, you've got great instincts, Joyce. Keep grinding. You're a great support asset. Support, like duct tape, like a spare tire, like something temporary until the real fix arrives. I nodded. Thanks, I said. I'll keep doing what I do. Which, at the moment, included printing the no-co clause and tucking it into a folder labeled board-approved exhibits. I slid it into my drawer, right behind the expense report Scott never read and the documentation that proved he signed off on rerouting inventory to the wrong customs port last quarter. All of it. Ready. Because when the lights go out during a merger, people don't look for the loudest voice. They look for the person who already packed the flashlight. And baby, I had a mag light. There's a special kind of nausea that comes from watching a man take a victory lap for a race he didn't even know was happening. Scott strutted through the office like he'd personally negotiated world peace while reverse parking a yacht. I watched him the way you watch a toddler with scissors, amused, terrified, and just waiting for the moment they clip their own bangs. The merger had moved into final stage rehearsals. That meant executive roundtables, investor queue and a prep, and endless pre-briefings filled with words like synergy, operational optimization, and cross-departmental leverage, all of which are basically corporate foreplay for someone's about to get fired. Scott was the star of the show, of course. He insisted on new headshots, brought in a stylist, rented one of those ring lights that make grown men look like they've got moist skin and a soul, even made the design intern mock up a fake Ops Vision 2025 slide deck with a lion in the background, a lion. Because apparently he was the apex predator of logistics now. Joyce, he said one morning, poking his head into my office without knocking, can you jazz up this deck for the VC pitch? I want something that says we're agile, but like bold, disruptive, but not chaotic. Think SpaceX, but for pallets. Sure, I said, already opening my file marked Scott's Delusions 2025. I gave him exactly what he wanted. Bullet points he could pretend he came up with. Charts that made no sense but looked expensive. A timeline that omitted the 3 weeks he disappeared to shadow the CEO, but actually just played golf with Greg from purchasing. I made it all look clean, tight, and visionary. Because I needed his spotlight burning at full power. I needed his shadow big enough to hide behind. While he polished his big boy voice for the rehearsals, I focused on the back end. The real guts of the operation, compliance sign-offs, exhibit routing, and legal binders thicker than a Vegas buffet menu. That's where the truth lies, not in the pitch decks or Scott's 3-syllable words, but in the paperwork. It was during one of those late nights, cold fluorescent lighting humming like a nervous breakdown, that I saw it. My name. On the routing slip for the final compliance packet. It was small. Just initials next to a pre-clearance box on Exhibit K operational continuity and post-merger validation. But there it was. JLB. Scott's name? Nowhere, because why would it be? He wasn't board approved. He wasn't even in the original compliance chain. He'd been too busy managing his personal brand to notice that the acquirer's legal team had requested documentation from me. Me, not Scott and Joyce, just Joyce. I stared at that slip for a long minute, not with shock but with a kind of soft awe, like finding a flower growing in the crack of a sidewalk you walk over every day. It had all been happening in the background, quiet emails, invisible approvals, forms no one reads unless something goes wrong. The acquirer's team was methodical. They didn't care who looked good in a suit. They cared about continuity, about compliance, about making sure someone had already thought through what happens when the warehouse software crashes at 2 a.m. or the Department of Defense decides they want to audit your fuel contracts. They wanted someone boring, someone consistent, someone like me. Scott, meanwhile, was having his name added to the Investor One sheet as strategic lead ops transition. I saw the draft, smiled, let him keep it. The trap wasn't a bear trap. It wasn't sudden or sharp. It was a slow, silent pressure, the kind that builds over time until you don't even know your ankle's broken until you try to stand. He was going to step into it willingly, smiling, because I made it look like a goddamn red carpet. The morning of the investor rehearsal, he winked at me like we were in on some shared secret. Big day, he said. Let's make him believe I invented supply chains. I nodded. You'll do great. He walked off adjusting his collar, not realizing he was dressed for his own undoing. And I went back to reviewing routing confirmations, double-checking compliance seals, and sipping my burnt office coffee like it was a toast. Not to his success, but to the moment that coffee would be replaced with champagne. It came buried under 6 other emails, sandwiched between a lunch and learn about forklift safety and an all-caps disaster from facilities about someone microwaving fish again. Subject line was simple: continuity touchpoint ops transition. Sent from A, legal domain with no CCs, no RSVP tracker, no Outlook circus. Just a meeting link and one line of text. Joyce, can you join for a quick verification ahead of next week's sign-off? Informal, shouldn't take more than 10. No mention of Scott, no calendar invite, no legal boilerplate or formal phrasing. Which meant one thing, this wasn't for show. I stared at the message for maybe 30 seconds, long enough to feel the hair on the back of my neck start to rise. In the world of M&A, there are two kinds of calls. The loud ones, where execs bark into speakerphones while interns take notes and eat stale bagels, and the quiet ones where decisions actually get made. This was the latter. I clicked join exactly 1 minute early. The room loaded slowly, grainy thumbnails, 3 initials, and one camera turned on. A woman with a ponytail, zero makeup, and the calm vocal cadence of someone who's signed off on billion-dollar deals between bites of tuna salad. Hi Joyce, she said. Appreciate you hopping on. Just need a quick check-in, internal box ticking. We're finalizing Schedule K and Exhibit L for next week's sign-off. Still good to proceed as the board cleared continuity designy? No pleasantries. No context. Just are you still in position to wield the knife we're about to hand you? I nodded. Yes, I've reviewed the materials. My clearance stands, I'm available, that was it. No applause, no dramatic music. Just 3 heads nodding in tiny video tiles, the sound of someone typing in the background, and the distinct click of a box being marked as solved. Well then, the ponytail woman said, we'll route final docs by Monday. Appreciate your time. Call ended at 11:13 a.m. At 11:14, I exhaled, not the nervous kind. The kind that comes after you've set something in motion and there's no turning back. The kind of breath you take when the oxygen feels earned. I didn't tell anyone about the call. Not Scott, not HR, not even Diane, though I drafted the message 3 times. There's power in quiet. Power in letting the storm think you've evacuated while you're actually sitting in the basement, flipping the main breaker. I went back to my desk and continued like nothing happened. Edited a policy draft. Replied to Greg's 7th attempt to circle back on a missed KPI. Ran a warehouse intake simulation that Scott forgot to approve last week, and signed it off myself under the existing delegation authority. No one noticed. That afternoon, Scott stopped by with a Red Bull in one hand and a half-eaten protein bar in the other. Hey, legal ping you for anything? I had a missed call from some New York number but didn't recognize it. I shook my head, haven't heard a thing. He grunted, tore off another chunk of his bar, and walked away mid-chew. I watched him go, that same familiar twinge rising in my chest. The one I used to mistake for fear, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was clarity. I wasn't climbing anymore. I wasn't asking. I wasn't waiting for someone to open the door. I'd already found the blueprints, already built the key. And now I was just waiting for the lock to show up. The man actually called it Scott's merger, like he'd trademarked it, like the whole $350 million acquisition was just a neighborhood block party he organized with a couple folding chairs and a Costco sheet cake. Hey team, he said, arms wide like a televangelist selling salvation through bandwidth optimization. Big news. Merger's officially entering final phase execution, and I'm thrilled to be leading us through this historic moment. Historic, Jesus. We were crammed into the all-hands meeting room, standing room only. Someone had brought in extra folding chairs from marketing, and Greg was already sweating through his quarter zip. The whole thing smelled like desperation and catered bagels. Scott stood up front like a prom king giving a speech he didn't write, basking in fluorescent admiration. I stood near the back, pen in hand, notepad resting against my forearm. It's amazing how invisible you become once people assume you're just the note taker. I watched him strut through a half-hour of buzzwords, and back padding so aggressive it could have been classified as a self-massage. Then he did it. That little flick of the wrist, the smirk, the casual pivot like I was part of the office furniture. And of course, none of this would be possible without Joyce, he said, eyes sweeping the room like he expected applause. She'll be essential during the transition, right, Joyce? He didn't wait for an answer, just grinned like he'd tossed me a bone. I smiled, just enough to be polite, took another note I didn't need to. I was done playing tug-of-war with a man who thought condescension was a leadership style. Let him think he was handing me a compliment. Meanwhile, the trap was already creaking beneath him. At 3:12 p.m., I got the email. Subject, Exhibit K signature routing. Remind no one else was CC'd. Not Scott, not legal, just me. Hi Joyce, just confirming you're still set to sign Exhibit K Ops continuity on Tuesday. Docs will be prepped. Call will initiate at 9:30 a.m. We'll loop you in directly. I read it once, then again, then let it sit there in my inbox like a loaded weapon, glowing. I didn't smile, I didn't celebrate. I just moved the message to a folder labeled K Final and shut my laptop for the day. Because this wasn't the moment to cheer. This was the moment to stay very, very still. Scott's little press tour continued for the rest of the week. He did a podcast with a startup logistics blog no one reads, hosted a fireside chat in the break room where he compared merger strategy to football plays, because of course he did. Even gave an internal AMA session where someone actually asked, "What's been your biggest leadership challenge this quarter?" And he said, "Delegation. I'm just so hands-on, it's hard to let go." I almost choked on my coffee. But I didn't say a word. I took notes. Smiled in meetings. Stayed until 6:45 Thursday night cleaning up the inventory data model he forgot to QA. Then I submitted it under his dashboard access credentials, because that's what he asked for. Wouldn't want him getting the credit without plausible deniability. In the shadows, I refined the continuity protocol one more time, reviewed the transition triggers, pre-read the onboarding checklist the acquirer's legal team would expect me to co-sign. Everything in place. Seamless. I wasn't just ready to sign Exhibit K. I was Exhibit K. Scott still thought I was part of the backdrop. Still thought he could throw me bones and I'd wag my tail. He didn't realize he'd walked onto a stage I had designed, lit, sound-checked, and baited like a theater trapdoor. The thing about shadows, they're not always behind you. Sometimes they're underneath, waiting. The invite never came. Friday afternoon, 2 days before the final sign-off, my calendar remained suspiciously empty. No blocked time, no agenda. Just a forwarded thread from Scott to the executive assistant chain with one line: "Let's keep this tight, senior leadership only." And just like that, I was ghosted from the final meeting for a merger I'd quietly kept from imploding. I wasn't surprised. This was Scott's last act of control, his red carpet moment. His Oscar acceptance speech in front of the board, the acquirer's team, and the investor fly-ins. He wanted a clean photo op, no shadows, no footnotes, certainly no glue girl with a ballpoint pen and a memory like a filing cabinet. Still, I did what I was supposed to. I forwarded the legal confirmation, the email explicitly stating that my signature on Exhibit K was not optional, to the COO, Peter, with a short note. Per acquirer legal's instruction, I'll need to be present at Tuesday's sign-off for Exhibit K routing. Please confirm. No reply, not even a read receipt. Typical. Peter was Scott's golf buddy, the kind of man who treated policy compliance like a game of horseshoes, close enough counted. He once told me dead serious that audit trails were mostly for nerds, so I didn't hold my breath. But I did set my alarm for 5 o'clock a.m. Woke up calm, not the anxious, sweaty kind of calm that comes before a job interview or a first date. No, this was different. This was eye of the hurricane calm. The air was still. Sky was gray. My hand didn't shake as I zipped my laptop bag, printed 2 copies of the signed clearance memo, and left one folded in my glove compartment, just in case. I arrived at HQ at 7:32. The lot was nearly empty, just a few early execs who liked to pretend their Range Rovers didn't idle like tanks. Inside, the top floor had been transformed into a budget war room. Fresh flowers on the credenza, carafes of artisanal coffee, branded pens no one would use. The investor suite doors were already open. I walked right past the assistant trying not to make eye contact. "Joyce," she called out startled. I don't think you're on the list for today." I smiled. "That's all right. I'll just observe." And I slid into a chair in the back row like I'd been invited. No drama, no scene, just a quiet woman in a navy blazer, legs crossed, notebook open. Scott entered 5 minutes later, basking in his own importance like a cat returning from a neighborhood conquest. New tie, fresh haircut, PowerPoint remote in hand like a conductor's baton. He clocked me immediately, paused, smirked, said nothing. Instead, he launched into his opening slide, navigating operational synergy through transition excellence. Kill me. For the next 20 minutes, he walked the room through his Frankenstein of borrowed talking points, recycled jargon, and timeline bullet points he barely understood. He was half peacock, half TED talk fever dream. Every time he clicked to a new slide, I watched the acquirer's legal counsel take notes, not on the slides, but on who said what and how. At 8:21, the room shifted. The lights dimmed. The final documents were distributed. The acquirer's lead counsel, ponytail woman from the continuity call, opened her folder. And that was when the temperature dropped. Because in that room full of suits and bragging rights, there was only one line that mattered, and only one name next to it. But I didn't move yet. I just sat, steady, like thunder waiting for the lightning to hit. The air in that room got thick, like the conference table had been dunked in syrup. Everyone sat straighter without meaning to. The lawyer's page flipped with the sound of a guillotine, smooth, final, and followed by a silence that didn't feel accidental. Ponytail woman adjusted her glasses. She was mid-sentence, wrapping up the compliance transition logistics when her eyes paused mid-paragraph. She blinked, then said the words I'd been waiting months to hear. "We're blocked." She didn't say it loudly. She didn't raise her voice. She just set the sentence down on the table like a brick. "We need the ops director's signature per Schedule 14B to complete the transition binders. That's all. Nothing dramatic. Just a statement of procedural fact." Scott chuckled. Of course he did. He leaned forward, palms open like he was about to bless the congregation. "That'd be me," he said, grinning like a man who thinks he just found the last parking spot at the Super Bowl. Ponytail didn't smile. She pulled a separate folder from her briefcase. A slim, stamped packet. She flipped the first page and held it up slightly, not for the room, just for herself. "Read something." Tapped a line with her pen, then she looked up, past Scott. "Right at me." "Actually, no," she said, and now her voice did carry a little. "Per board clearance filings dated 6 months ago, the Director of Operational Continuity is Joyce L. Brenner." Silence, not awkward silence. Surgical silence. Scott's face did something strange, like it wanted to laugh but forgot how. His mouth was open, but no words came out. His eyebrows twitched upward like a drunk marionette being yanked by surprise. I didn't speak, not yet, Ponytail continued. Her signature is required on Exhibit K, Schedule 14B, and the downstream validation for regulatory sign-off. Otherwise, I'm afraid we can't proceed. She didn't sound afraid. I stood, not quickly, not triumphantly, just deliberately, like I'd done this walk before, because I had. Every night for years. I'd walked warehouse floors, data trails, mistake logs, supplier escalations, and vendor nightmares. I'd walked the gap between Scott's decisions and my cleanups. This was just another walk to the fire, except this time I wasn't holding the extinguisher, I was the fire marshal. My pulse thudded like a kick drum in my ears, but my feet stayed steady. I walked to the head of the table, heels soft against the carpet. The room parted like a curtain, not dramatically, just respectfully, because even the interns could feel the shift now. I reached for the folder Ponytail handed me, pen ready, the page already marked. Joyce, Scott said, voice thin and higher than usual. What is this? I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in weeks. This, I said, calm as a lake in winter, is continuity. Then I signed. One line, one signature. And the merger, all $350 million of it, continued moving forward. Without Scott. Scott made a sound I've never heard from another human being, a cross between a laugh, a cough, and the first note of a panic attack. His smile wobbled like a Jenga tower on its last breath. Wait, he said, gesturing toward me like I'd just risen from the floorboards with a knife. Her? It hit the table like a question and an accusation all at once. And everyone, every single person in that room, turned to look at me, not out of confusion, of realization. That slow, dawning look people get when the magic tricks over and the magician standing there, empty sleeves, cards gone, rabbit sipping a martini in the corner. The CEO, who until now had been quietly massaging his temples, straightened. He didn't look at Scott, he looked at me. Joyce, he said, voice low, careful, as if he already knew the answer but needed to hear it anyway. Is this correct? I nodded. Then I opened my bag. Pulled out the pre-cleared Exhibit K, pristine, tabbed, board-stamped, and dated. The same one I'd printed at 6:15 that morning. The same one legal had already validated on 3 separate calls. I handed it to Ponytail Woman without a word. She didn't hesitate, didn't even blink. She signed, merger protocol complete, she said, flipping the folder closed with the finality of a coffin lid. We're clear to proceed. It was quiet. No clapping. No grand declarations. Just the sound of Scott's breath, shallow, ragged, like someone who'd just realized the spotlight he'd been chasing wasn't a spotlight at all. It was a laser. He turned to Peter the coup, you knew? Peter didn't answer. But he did glance toward the legal team, then back at Scott, then away like a man already drafting the next org chart in his head. Someone from HR entered, clipboard in hand, a manila envelope, walked directly to Scott and handed it to him without making eye contact. Your transition materials, she said softly, per board directive. Scott didn't open it, just stood there frozen, staring at the envelope like it was full of spiders and broken dreams. The room was still dead quiet when I packed my bag. No rush, no ceremony. I slid my notepad in, zipped the front pocket, and turned to leave. As I reached the door, I heard someone, maybe Greg, maybe one of the junior analysts, whisper it like a prayer or a confession. She played the long game. I didn't stop walking, didn't look back because I didn't need to. They finally saw it. Not the smile, not the silence, the architecture. The whole damn blueprint I'd built beneath their egos and assumptions and support energy pats on the head. And now they knew exactly who ran the show. Because the best promotions are the ones no one sees coming. Until the signature hits the paper. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit 'em.